right, so let me go to the first slide. All right, so this is gonna be the program for today. We'll have some words of welcome, then we'll have a keynote address, and then a panel discussion, and we'll also assist to a case study and some solutions, and we'll then conclude with some closing remarks, a way forward, and then a Q&A where everybody can ask any questions they want, any clarifications they need, or anything they might want to know more about. All right, so welcome to our webinar. First of all, I just wanted to say my name is Jaji, and I serve as the National Executive Board President for NAfSA. And throughout our mission, NAfSA is committed to empowering young African students abroad for success academically and professionally. This webinar is going to focus on climate change, disproportionate impact on Africa. And we want to raise awareness, we want to create dialogue, discussions, and explore actionable solutions for our members. And we want to provide knowledge and connections that aim to help our members to feel empowered to contribute more to Africa's economic, cultural, and social advancement. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As we gather to delve into the crucial topic of climate change and its profound implications, particularly on the African continent, it is essential to recognize the urgency and significance of this issue. Climate change stands as one of the most pressing challenges of our time, with far-reaching consequences that touch every corner of the globe. Africa, with its rich biodiversity, diverse ecosystems, and vibrant communities, is uniquely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. From extreme weather events to shifting rainfall patterns and prolonged drought, the effects of climate change threaten the livelihoods and well-being of millions across the continent. We want to emphasize the importance of addressing climate change not only as a global responsibility, but also as a moral imperative to safeguard the future of our planet and its inhabitants. By coming together to understand the complexities of climate change and its disproportionate impact on Africa, we can pave the way for meaningful action, resilience, and sustainable development. Let us embark on this journey of knowledge sharing and collaboration with a shared commitment to mitigating the impacts of climate change and building a more resilient and equitable future for all. Thank you so much. We'll proceed with the next part of the webinar as of right now. And first of all, I want to do introductions. So if all of the speakers could unmute themselves and tell us just a little bit about themselves.
I'll go first. My name is Gabrielle Dio. I'm from Senegal. I'm a senior at NYU, and my concentration is called Exploring Colonialism and Sustainable Economic Development in Francophone West Africa and the United States. So I'm really excited to be here today to learn more about climate change from the rest of my panelists as well. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Phoebe. I'm from Ghana. I'm a lawyer. My area of specialty is infrastructure development, energy, but I'm currently pursuing a second LLM at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. My focus is actually sustainability, climate change, climate finance, and I'm excited to learn from you guys and to exchange some solutions on how to deal with the issues facing Africa.
So yeah, I'll go next. Yeah, thank you. First of all, I'll say a very good job by yourself, Diaji, and then Ken for putting this together. I understand how some of these can be very difficult. I was a student leader myself in my undergrad, so I know what you have to go through to get some of these things working. And then, yeah, thank you so much for putting this together. and the invite as well. Yeah. So my name is Justice Bahini. I'm a trained engineer. My expertise is in energy and in climate change. Yeah, I'm a man of few words, of basically 2 words. And then I'm glad to be with you today to learn from you and then see how best I can also be of benefit to everyone. Great seeing everyone here. I'm usually very happy when I come across students who are very much enthusiastic to know what is going on and how we can work together to solve problems, basically. So I'm here for the next few minutes or an hour to learn and engage. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for introducing yourself. I think I already introduced myself, but just a refresher, my name is Jaji Jawara. I am a sophomore studying mechanical engineering with a minor in math at the University of Toledo, and I serve as the NEB president for this academic year. So it's my pleasure to be working with all of you, and thank you so much for giving us your time and providing us with your invaluable knowledge about this subject. Okay, so we'll start with the keynote address, and Justice might not have mentioned it, but is our keynote for this event, and Justice, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, so before I start, what I'll say is that the most important thing is getting the message out there. So after we are done, let's see how best we can get a message out there to the masses. Probably each of us posting what we said over here to get on this on the media, and then get everyone must hear whatever we discussed over here. Yeah. So let me just keep it brief. My keynote address will go through an introductory phase and then a little bit of key trends, challenges, financial challenges, solution as well. Yeah. So to start with, climate change is an issue. And then at this juncture, what I keep telling everyone, relevant stakeholders, is that we are no more at the point of try and error. It is now a matter of urgency. We all see whatever is going on over the world right now. Just yesterday, we saw the strike from one country to another, and it is surely going to create some hikes in oil prices. So we have to get ready. Yeah, which has an effect on these energy issues and then the climate as well. So it is a matter of urgency now. It is no more a matter of playing around. Yeah, we have to resolve it, or else there's an assurance that we are surely going to fall into a ditch, and it will be so shameful that we are going to, we will suffer, but not suffer that much. The next generation coming after us will not forgive us if we don't resolve it. Yeah, so there have been panel estimations used in research on the effects of climate change on vulnerable nations in the sub-Saharan African, reveal that the rising temperatures and climate shocks compound the problems already faced by these areas. The fragility defined by government failures and structural flaws makes climate change more dangerous, and emphasizing the necessity for all-encompassing mitigating solutions. When we look at the IPCC study highlights, the hazards of inappropriate adaptation and interdependence of response options across sectors regarding climate change impacts adaptation and vulnerability in Africa. It highlights the significance of long-term cross-border and cross-sectional planning to prevent escalation effects on other areas. The report also emphasizes how important Africa resilience and sustainability are to have solid legislature frameworks, access to climate information services, and ecosystem-based adaptation when developing and executing climate change response choices. That is by the IPCC. Moreover, the correlation between climate change and other issues need to be investigated and are resolved. The results suggest that climate change For example, when we take food security, it exhibits food security, which impacts economic growth and escalates poverty and malnutrition. This emphasizes how urgently climate issues has to be resolved. Now, moving to some of the key trends and the challenges. African environmental challenges marked by increased temperatures, shrinking glaciers, and more frequent severe weather events underscore a critical aspect of the continent's climate crisis. The continent holds the last remaining glaciers in East Africa, such as those on Mount Kilimanjaro, the Rwenzori Mountains, and Mount Kenya. The glaciers serve as a stark indicators of climate change, with projections suggesting they could disappear by the year 2040s. These glaciations is a loss of spectacular natural heritage and a sign of broad environmental shifts across the continent, poised to profoundly affect water availability, agriculture, and biodiversity. The impact of these environmental changes is far-reaching, contributing significantly to food insecurity, poverty, displacement, and the others. Africa's agriculture and other climate impacts the backbone of its economy and in a critical source of livelihood for most of its populations is especially vulnerable to climate variability. Changes in some of the effects, such as precipitation patterns, increased temperatures, and frequency of extreme weather events such as droughts and flood directly affects crop yields, food prices, food security, energy issues that is currently happening on the continent. This situation is aggravated by existing socioeconomic challenges, making the continent particularly susceptible to the adverse impacts of climate change. This is a point by the IPCC once again. Adding to Africa's climate dilemma is the energy paradox, right? Despite the continent's abundance, renewable energy sources such as solar, wind, hydro, and then the others, it still needs to improve its energy access. Currently, the energy access in Ghana in Africa is nothing to write home about. First of all, energy access is an issue before we think about security, before we even think about pricing and then the others. So if we are not even able to resolve accessibility, how do we talk about security and then the other stuff, which has to be resolved? Because energy, I always say, is the ability to do work. So if you are not resolving your energy issues, it means what work are you doing? And then that depicts the kind of economy that we are having on Africa. So this is not a matter of, it's a matter of urgency that affects our GDP, economy, and then every aspect of the continent. A significant portion of its energy needs is still met through coal and fossil fuels, contributing to greenhouse gas emissions and environmental degradations. This reliance on fossil fuels exacerbates the global climate crisis and hinders Africa's development aspects by locking into its high carbon, unsustainable energy pathway. Someone will say we didn't really add or make more impacts in this climate issue that we are having. But well, if we find a way to reduce our carbon emissions, it will help entirely the global as well. So yeah, in as much as we've not really contributed much, we still have a part to play in reducing it. Yeah, transitioning to renewable energy source is critical to achieving sustainable development, enhancing energy access, and mitigating climate change aspect. Like as I mentioned earlier, just what is happening yesterday is surely going to have a toll on oil prices, and subsequently thermal plants are going to suffer. Energy prices are going to go high. So if we have transitioned by now to renewable energy, we will be smiling on the other side of the world, right? Yeah, so it's no more a game of playing around, but it's a sense of urgency now. These environmental and energy challenges call for integrated strategies that embrace sustainable development, enhance reliance to climate change, and expedite the transition to renewable energy. Such approaches are crucial for addressing the immediate impact of climate change, ensuring food security, reducing poverty, and achieving long-term sustainable development in Africa. The continent's response to these challenges will significantly affect its future and global efforts to combat climate change. Let's look at some of the financial challenges and solutions. The financial gap for addressing climate change in Africa is a crucial challenge. The continent is estimated to need between 2.8 billion to 3 trillion from the year 2020 to 2030 to implement its national determined contributions, those are the NDCs, as part of its commitment to the Paris Agreement. However, the current climate finance flows to Africa are significantly lower than needed to meet these ambitious goals. This discrepancy highlights the urgent need for increased investment and financial mechanisms to support Africa's climate action plans. To bridge the financing gap, Africa must explore and leverage various funding sources, including domestic sources, multilateral development banks, bilateral partnerships, and the private sector. National governments have a pivotal role in mobilizing these resources. They can undertake measures to increase tax to GDP ratios, which could provide much needed fiscal space for climate investment. Additionally, phasing out fossil fuel subsidies could redirect significant financial flows towards renewable energy and other climate incentives, aligning national fiscal policies with sustainability goals. Developing a robust carbon market in Africa presents a promising opportunity for generating revenue that could support climate actions. Carbon pricing mechanisms, such as carbon taxes or carbon trade systems, can incentivize the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions whilst raising funds that could be reinvested in carbon projects. Projections suggested that the carbon market in Africa could raise approximately $6 billion by 2030 and over $120 billion by 2050. These funds could significantly contribute to financing renewable energy projects, afforestation programs, and other incentives to reduce the continent's carbon footprint and enhance its resilience to climate change. Now let's look at some other factors, such as the carbon credits as a solution, education and awareness. Carbon credits are promising mechanisms for mitigating climate change impact and fostering economic development, especially for regions like Africa, which are severely impacted by climate change, yet hold vast potential for carbon sequestration projects. Here's how they can make significant difference. One is through financing climate initiatives. Carbon credit provides a financial incentive for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Companies or countries that exceed their emission reduction targets can sell carbon credits in the carbon market, thus generating funds. These funds can be crucial for Africa, where we can be directed towards renewable energy projects, forests conservation efforts, and other climate-related initiatives that require sustainable investment. The other point we have to do with promoting sustainable development. The sale of carbon credits can directly support sustainable development projects. For instance, projects that focus on clean energy, such as solar or wind farms, reduce emissions, creates job opportunities, and improve local livelihoods. Similarly, forest conservation projects can help severe biodiversity, can help preserve biodiversity, whilst providing communities with sustainable income sources such as ecotourism or agroforestry. The next point, encouraging global participation. A transparent and robust market-based carbon trading system can encourage global participation by making it financially viable for companies and countries to invest in emission reduction projects. This global market can provide necessary scale for significant emission reductions whilst ensuring funds flow towards projects with most important impact. Let me just highlight the other three, then I'll conclude. Raising awareness and education can be very important. The challenges and then transparency, and then the final one, let me just touch a little bit on that. That is potential in Africa. Africa's vast tracts of forests, significant potential for renewable energy, and extensive agricultural lands make it an ideal candidate for carbon credit projects. By harnessing this potential, Africa can contribute to global emissions reduction and attract investment in sustainable development, helping to address environmental and economic challenges. To conclude, the path to addressing climate change in Africa involves a multi-directional approach that combines mitigation, adaptation, and a sustainable exploitation of its natural resources. While the financial challenges are significant, innovative financial mechanisms such as carbon credits, international support, and private sector engagements can provide necessary funds to drive Africa's green transition. Achieving this will require concerted efforts from national governments, global partners, and private sector, all working towards a resilient and sustainable African continent. Yeah, I end over here, but let me just add this. So mostly the young ones, I always encourage the young ones that we have to imbibe, we have to carry this climate and energy agenda on our shoulders, right? We are going to suffer. In the end, we have about 30, 60, 30, 40, 60 years ahead of us, and it gets deteriorated, which means you are going to be in trouble. And the most important thing is that the next generation will not forgive us. We have to get it right, and we have to get it right. It's no more a talk show, right? It's a matter of urgency. So yeah, let's carry it. Let's make it our own. Let's keep pushing. Yeah, and then we'll surely get solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this, Justice. You brought up a lot of topics I never really imagined we could apply to the African continent, like carbon credits and those kind of concepts. And I feel like a lot of people are gonna benefit from learning about all of those possibilities. And you are right, we need to get it right. The future generations, they need us to get it right now. We don't have room for making mistakes anymore. All right, so we are gonna move to the discussion panel. And we'll be talking about the impact of climate change on agriculture and food security. And we'll also be talking about the effects on the environment, more precisely precipitation, flooding, and water. And we'll also end it by talking about the socioeconomic impacts, including displacement and migration. I'll be asking a general question, and whoever feels like they want to answer, feel free to just jump in. So we'll start with the impact of climate change on agriculture and food security. And I just wanted to ask all of our panelists, what does the impact of climate change and on agriculture and food security look like for such a biodiverse continent? Because sometimes we've been seeing a lot of changes on the environment and the climate side, but how does it specifically look for the agriculture and food security side? Whoever wants to answer, feel free to just jump in.
Okay, so let me take this one. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm a little under the weather, and then My voice is not too good, but pardon me. So climate change surely have a major impact on agriculture. The first one we'll have to do is reduction in crop yields. So we see alteration in temperature and precipitation patterns, disrupt growing conditions leading to diminished productivity. There have been a number of researches. The most prominent one will have to do with Lobel and then the Fields in 2007. They are still doing some other ones, which underscores the severity of this issue. And then what will interest us is that with every 1 degree C increase in temperature, potentially results in a 10% decline in yields for staple crops like rice, wheat, and maize. And for 1% degree C yielding to 10% decline is something to really worry about. And mostly as it affects staple crops like wheat, rice, and maize. When we go to Ghana, most of the foods we eat are just within this 3 brackets: wheat, rice, maize, right? We use maize for a lot of stuff. Cassava, the food we eat like fufu, and Nigerians also has a similar dish, right? Most of our dishes are carbohydrate and all those stuff. So getting these food yields reduced by 10%, yeah, it's a very big blow, which we need to quickly find a way around it, else we are gradually moving into scarcity. And then furthermore, the heightened frequency and intensity of extreme weather events such as droughts and floods further intensified this decline, posing significant challenges to global food production. So the first point has to do with the reduction of crop yields. And then secondly, there's a shift in growing regions, right? Rising temperatures and shifting rainfall patterns are driving profound changes in geographical distribution of crops. Somebody will say that, how about artificial irrigation and all those stuff? Already energy access is an issue. We don't have the electricity for the comfort of our residential houses. How do we even talk about electricity for mechanization, even the availability and the reliability, right? So we are already struggling over here. Artificial irrigation is good, but where is the electricity to power them, right? So it wouldn't really hold here, but we can just talk about it as a future way of helping resolve some of these issues. Yeah. And then also, such shift prevents formidable challenges for farmers who must adapt to unfamiliar conditions or face diminished productivity. Let me just go through the third point, and then we will just end here. It also intensifying of pests and disease pressure on agricultural systems. We all know that warmer temperatures and altered precipitation patterns provide ideal breeding grounds for pests and pathogens, which leads to increased crop damage and yield losses. Yeah, so with these 3 points, we know that there's surely an adverse impact of climate change on agriculture, which if we don't resolve it or we don't find a way out, we are gradually moving into a ditch that wouldn't be favorable for us. Yeah.
Thank you so much for all of those insights. And thank you for shining a light and going more in depth on this topic, especially when we know that agriculture plays a big part of alimentation, nutrition, and the economic life in Africa. So thank you for bringing light to that. I think we can move to the next question. And that one has to do with the effects of climate change on the environment, especially water bodies, flooding, and precipitation. Sorry, did someone say something?
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, I just wanted to add something to what Justice talked about in terms of the impact of climate change on agriculture. So I did like a research on Chad. We know that Chad's economy is basically agriculture is sort of like the cornerstone of Chad's economy. But recently, because of the climate change is impacted the rainfall patterns, it has also in turn impacted the agricultural sector. So the yields from the agricultural sector in Chad has practically drastically reduced. And we see the trend, or we see a linkage to food insecurity. Over 3 million people in Chad is facing food insecurity, with about 500,000 children are actually at the risk of malnutrition. So you could see like a direct correlation of climate change, how it has impacted the agriculture sector. Right now, the yields from Chad in terms of agriculture is profoundly low. You see that translating in terms of food security. 3 million people are facing food insecurity in Chad, right? And that too, you see it translate in terms of malnutrition. 500,000 children in Chad are malnourished. And so there's like a serious correlation between climate change, agriculture, food insecurity, and malnutrition.
Thank you for bringing light to this, because I feel like it's a very common trend in African nations right now. Even in the country where I'm from, right now they have like a very big drought and they haven't had as much rain as they used to. So the crops haven't been as good as they used to, and a lot of people are facing malnutrition and a lot of issues related to food security. So thank you for bringing a light to that. Did Gabriella want to talk about something? Also had something, or do you guys want to move to the next question?
We can move on to the next question because what I had to add is kind of similar to the topic that I'll be covering later on.
All right, that's perfect. Then let's move to the next one. And as I was saying, this time, let's try to see the impact of climate change on the environment, more precisely water bodies and flooding and precipitation. And if anyone wants to take the mic, the floor is yours.
All right, so I'll just start off by talking about how there's been an increase of extreme weather on the continent and inconsistent precipitation patterns. So the lack of precipitation leads to droughts. So there's less water available for drinking and agricultural purposes. So there's less water for livestock and crops. So this leads to the crops dying and also the livestock dying. But then there's also a problem of excessive precipitation, which causes flooding. So this also leads to the destruction of crops, the killing of livestock, flooding on the streets, which makes it challenging for cars and other vehicles to get around. So I know I was in Senegal this summer during the rain season, and it was especially challenging for us to get around, especially because the dirt roads were flooded, and like if you didn't have a truck or like an SUV, it was really challenging to get around. And so another consequence would be flooding of houses, not just on the roads, but these houses that are not built to withstand floods and like a substantial amount of water, which also leads to displacement and people having to find shelter elsewhere. And so overall, flooding just slows down daily life. If people can't get around, they can't be productive, they can't work, and they can't go to school. So it's a struggle for everyone. And then also, I want to talk a little bit about rising sea levels. So rising sea levels are obviously caused by the melting of glaciers due to global warming. So this increases the overall level of the seawater, and it causes coastal lines to recede further inland. So as water moves further inland, houses and buildings are destroyed, which also leads to more displacement and people having to find another place to live. And then sea levels also cause soil degradation. So this is when soil more salt water is traveling inland, which contaminates the soil, which makes the soil not suitable for agriculture. So these crops tend to die because the soil quality is not good for growing plants. And as a result, people have less access to food, which also increases food insecurities across the African continent. And then lastly, this also limits fresh water supply available because groundwater is also being contaminated with seawater and salt water. And as a result of this contamination, water cannot be used for drinking. It can't be used for agricultural purposes, which also decreases the amount of food that can be produced, which is especially concerning since the population of Africa is rapidly growing.
Thank you so much. I love how everything is just connected. How the impact on water is also impacting food security, it's also impacting economics activities, and it's also impacting migration. Personally, it's something very alarming, especially when even without climate change, people didn't have access to a lot of clean water, and now it's even getting worse. Does any of the other panelists want to add something to this? Or shall we move to the next question? All right, so let's move to the next question then. Thank you so much. All right, so the next point talks about all the impact of climate change on socioeconomic activities, including poverty, inequality, and sustainable development. If anybody wants to jump in, feel free, the floor is yours.
Okay, so Diaji, thank you very much for this question. I think this is an issue that is very, very personal to me, so I could talk about this for days, but I'll try and be as brief as I can. I think Justice mentioned the IPCC. So the IPCC is just basically like your go-to people for scientific assessments on climate change, right? And in their latest report, I believe it's 2023, they indicated that the countries most impacted by climate change are the least polluters. I think Justice made reference to that. In as much as this is like a profound statement, in as much as it's like a wake-up call, I think we have to interrogate that statement. And we have two questions to ask. So who are the most impacted? And the most impacted are obviously countries from the global south. Developing countries actually make up countries from the global south. And Africa, from the report, Africa, specifically sub-Saharan Africa, is the most impacted by climate change. So the next question that would help us understand the socioeconomic impact is why? Why is Africa the most impacted by climate change? I think the answer is quite obvious, right? But it's obvious and very simple. It's because of lack of resources. I know that there's certain literature that will challenge that position. I mean, the literature that talks about the fact that the geographical location of a particular country makes it more susceptible to climate impact. I agree with that. I mean, we've seen that in terms of the small island countries. Just the mere fact that they are close to the sea exposes them to climate impact, especially when there is when there is sea level rise. But fundamentally, the reason why Africa or sub-Saharan Africa is the most impacted is because we lack adequate resources to deal or to put in place resilience projects or to put in place adaptation projects, right? China, America, they are all being impacted by climate change. However, the difference is that they have resources to be able to adapt. And so it's not a coincidence that there's sort of like a connection between poverty and climate impact, right? When you look at both reports, let's take the SDG report, their recent report, and I believe it was 2023, that actually also said that, look, sub-Saharan Africa recorded the highest global poverty rate. In fact, 41.3%. 41.3%, that is almost like half the population is living below the international poverty line. So the issue of poverty is that there is like a relationship between climate change and poverty and climate change. Poverty has an impact on climate change has an impact on poverty. What do I mean by that? Let me just give like a simple example, something we've been talking about all this while, agriculture. So climate change. I think Gabriel talked about, I think, was it Gabriel or Justice, talking about the fact, the issue about changing weather patterns and things like that. I think it was either Gabriel or Justice. So when there's climate change, there's change in weather patterns. What happens when there's change in weather patterns? There's change in rain patterns. Agriculture is reliant on rain, right? Especially when you come to the continent, it's small scale agriculture, subsistence farming. And so they basically rely on the rainfall patterns. So when there is change in the patterns, what does it do? It affects agriculture yield, right? If your agriculture yield is affected, what is the correlating effect? It affects the income that you derived from your agricultural proceeds. What happens when your income is affected? Your standard of living drops. What happens when your standard of living drops? Invariably, you're living below the poverty line. And look at it the other way too. When there's climate change and you're a poor farmer and the rain patterns change, what happens? You don't have the resources to be able to put in place irrigation projects or, these high-tech irrigation projects that would help you manage the disruption in the rain patterns. You don't have the resources, right? So it's sort of like an intersecting relationship. Climate change impacting poverty. Because of poverty, you're also being impacted more by climate change. So there is an undeniable intersection between climate change and poverty. And then on the issue of inequality, when you look back at the IPCC report Justice made reference to, it says the women and children are the most impacted by climate change. And when you look at countries, you see that across societies, climate change affects women differently than it affects men. Let me give another example. So we talked about water. Climate change affects accessibility of water. When there is a lack of accessibility to water, who are the most impacted? Women, because women and girls are invariably the main people that, quote unquote, provides water for the family. So if there is lack of access to water, it's going to impact the women because they would have to travel long distances to be able to get water to meet the needs of the family. So there is this wildly intersection between climate change, poverty, and inequality. Climate change just exacerbates poverty. Climate change increases inequality. Inequality that is already there just becomes worsened by climate change because, one, there's lack of resources to be able to deal with the impact. So invariably, the people are more impacted and then they become poorer. So it's quite interesting that most government policies trying to target climate change are really not targeting women's rights, are really not targeting poverty. We're looking at adaptation, we're looking at mitigation, we're looking at green. It's all important, very, very, very important. But once you see the dynamic intersection between climate change and how it impacts, how poverty impacts climate change and how climate change impacts poverty, and you see all these dynamics, if you're able to get policies that target women's rights, empowering women, you put them in a position to be able to deal with the impacts of climate change more adequately. And so there's no doubt that there is a profound connection between these terms. And then on the issue of sustainable development, when you look at the SDG reports, the 2023 reports, it paints a very dire picture. Look, it clearly says that we are halfway through the commitment to eradicate poverty, all the 17 SDGs. We are halfway through, and we are nowhere near attainment of any of the goals, particularly when you look at Africa. And the reason for that, in most of the reports, is the impact of climate change. Because whereas governments are supposed to invest monies into education, into the health sector, into agriculture, they are investing the money into resilient projects. When there is flood, you would have to reconstruct your communities. All the monies that were otherwise budgeted for developmental projects, it's now being used to take care of climate emergencies like flooding, like storm and things like that. So you can also see the correlation between climate impact and sustainable development. Once your country is adversely impacted by climate change, all your resources are going to end up being channeled into addressing the climate, the impacts of the climate change, right? And then the resources that's supposed to go into our education sector, supposed to go into our health sector, it's not. What happens to development if you're not investing into those vital, critical sectors of your economy? You're definitely not going to develop. So there is this profound intersection between climate change, poverty, inequality, and sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you so much for going in so much depth. I know it's a very sensible subject for all of us, but I feel like we need to have those difficult conversations, and we need to bring those topics more into the discussions we have on the daily basis, because what is happening right now is very, very, very bad. And if we keep on going in this direction, we'll be losing a lot of people along the way, and life will just be harder on the continent. All right, let's move to the case study, and thanks to all of you for giving me and giving the audience so much insight and more ideas on what is actually really going on in Africa. Justice, the floor is yours, whatever you want.
Okay, thank you. And then thank you very much, Phoebe, for the input. That was very insightful. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I believe we've been talking for quite some time now. So we might want to switch a bit to watching a video. So I don't know whether you can project. So I'm going to talk about the first one. Okay, let's watch the video first, then I'll talk about it. Yeah, if you can just project it for us.
All right, let me try and give me just 1 second.
Okay, that's fine. It's okay. Okay, so whilst you are resolving it, yeah. So the video is basically about a green.
When Barbara switched to TurboTax, 4 generations of family tradition with 5 little words.
All right, I'm gonna share my screen. Let me know if you can see it in just a bit. Okay. Can you see it? Let me just close this one. Okay. Can you see the video?
Yes.
Okay. Can you see it? Or it's good? Sorry, I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Sorry, yeah. So you can click that's
Is
that to make
by
it bigger, right?
desertification and drought.
It's supposed to be bigger. Let me just start again. Sorry, let me just start again.
That's fine.
Yeah, technology and me. Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay. Here it is.
Great. So you before you hit the
Migration.
start, yeah,
Sorry.
before you hit the start, let me just talk about this. So this is a great green wall initiative, and it's a Pan-African project aimed at combating desertation and then land degradation in the Sahel region by planting a wall of trees stretching across the continent. And then this initiative involves the planting of drought-resistant trees and shrubs along southern edges of the Sahara Desert to prevent soil erosion, restore degradable lands, and then mitigate the impact of climate change. And then, this initiative isn't just about the Sahel. It is a global symbol of humanity overcoming its biggest threats and our rapidly degrading environments. Since the birth of the initiative in 2007, life has started coming back to the land, bringing improved food security, jobs, and stability to people's lives. So let's just watch the video. So that's the Great Green Wall Initiative.
My home is embattled by desertification and drought, migration and conflict. Restoring the land is a matter of survival. It's up to us to create an African dream. We're talking about revitalizing the ecosystem, the economy of communities and villages. The future generation will hold us accountable. If people can't work their land, millions across the region will be forced to migrate. Qui est déjà vendu à ce convoyeur sans te rendre compte. J'ai eu 4 amis qui ont pris la balle. The Great Green Wall. It's not just about planting trees. It has to become a movement from the whole continent, from the whole world.
Okay, and let me go back to sharing the PowerPoint.
Okay. Thank you. I think the sound wasn't too good, but we all saw what was in the video anyway. Okay, thank you. So we saw a time when it was almost like a desert. Nothing was moving. People moving with sand and everything. And then the transformation they did by themselves, planting trees and all those things. And then the place became a place where humans can live rather than increasing migration. Now people decided to stay, plant crops, and then also encourage, reduce migration and then the others. So this is one project that is happening. It's called the Great Green Wall Initiative. They are just about 15% done now. Hopefully we will be able to expedite it. And then have its impacts that we are looking at on climate change. Then the next case study will be on the Eco Act Tanzania. So this is what the guys are doing over there. So the Eco Act Tanzania is a social enterprise that employs environmentally friendly and energy efficient processes to convert plastic waste into high quality construction materials. The initiative collaborates with local partners committed to reducing plastic pollution and actively engages low-income households in waste collection efforts. The utilization of plastic reduces dependence on on traditional wood-based construction materials, helping to conserve forest and biodiversity. So I think last 2 days I was having a chat with a friend who went for the African Cup of Nations in the Ivory Coast. And then she said she was surprised that right after the match, people would just be throwing their plastics on the streets. And she questioned them. She was like, why are they doing that? Oh, they said, oh, you shouldn't mind them. That is what we do over here. And then she was asking me a question. She said, how can we help reduce this? Can we have a system like we have in Europe and even in the US where you gather plastics, you send it, there's a place where you input it for money, right? Yeah, this is this is a great system. And then this is what these guys are doing in Tanzania to reduce this climate issue that we are talking about. And then the incentive they are even using is even more tangible. As in return for the plastic that you bring to us, they'll give you a medical plan. So they call it garbage medical insurance, right? So bring us the plastics, we'll put you on a medical insurance. So this is a very, very fantastic initiative that is working in there. I think so. Right after reading through this, I'm going to send it to my friend. That's you. There's something already happening in Tanzania that's we can have the same model in Ivory Coast and other parts that everybody will hop onto. And this is a very good case study that everyone would want to, have. Yeah. So I think that is it. I'll just talk about these 2 case studies.
So now we've talked about the effects, we've also talked about a case study, and now let's talk about possible solutions and more precisely possible solutions some like a student like me in the US could do. And my question is, the first one is about the impact of climate change on agriculture and food security, and how can we address these complex challenges, paying a particular attention to the African context, and how can we as African students in the diaspora contribute to the solutions? If anyone wants to take the lead on this, the mic is yours.
Okay, so let me just give a general solution. Then I would answer this question. So regarding agriculture, some of the ways we can resolve them will have to do with solar powered irrigation systems. Yeah, we can even explore not just solar, it can be hybrid. You can have a combination of solar and wind. Yeah, and then those powered irrigation systems. Since I always shy away from the fossils, like something that would take us off the grid. So the grid is already not sufficient. Demand and supply is already not matching up. So if you can get a standalone solar or wind powered irrigation, that should really solve a chunk of the problem. And also biogas production from agricultural waste is an area that you might want to look at. The next one will have to do with agroforestry. We need to go much more into that. And then I'll just talk about the precision farming. Yeah, we need to explore technology, remote sensing, drones, data analytics, and all those things to improve some of this stuff over there. And also conservation farming will help mitigate some of these issues as well. And then finally, disaster risk reduction and early warning systems. So I'm an advocate for predictions, trying to predict what is happening, what is going to happen, and then trying to resolve issues around it. Yesterday, I was watching the attack of Iran on Israel, and then you could see the beauty of the Iron Dome, how they are able to neutralize the missiles flying from Iran, about 99% of it, like that kind of technology, right? So what I'll encourage the Africans in the diaspora, if we can go more into research areas, like find a niche, I always say that every region needs peculiar solutions. So Africa needs peculiar solutions. Solutions in other parts of the world are good. We're not saying they are not good. We can bring them. But the African problem has to be solved the African way. So let's take up research projects into precision farming, what will really fit the African continent. Let's take us projects, conservation agriculture. How can we, even the execution, how can we implement it by creating a framework? It's not a matter of the stakeholders agreeing to whatever we have. Let's get a template, right? Like as we are currently doing for the African Sustainable Energy Center, which I'm spearheading together with Phoebe. So we have created a think tank where we are engaging the brightest of the brightest minds from Africa and the diaspora. There's a tank of ideas. Now let's think. We've brought the MITs on board. We've brought the Penns on board, the Stanfords, the Ivy League, everybody. Now think, how can we resolve issues on accessibility? How can we resolve issues on affordability? How can we resolve issues on this? So everybody's bringing ideas to be able to get a framework, and then we put it out there. If the stakeholders will listen, no problem. We have done our work. So let's look at taking up some of this stuff and delving much more into it to bring solutions, and then the footprint. We can take it as our research topics in our various institutions and another stuff. The other time I was telling Phoebe about a write-up I saw at the Clemens Center for Energy Policy in Penn on Ghana's energy system. And there wasn't any Ghanaian on it. It was so shameful. I confronted them. I was like, whoa, we are here, right? So why don't you engage us? The African solution, the African problem has to be solved the African way. We understand you have your own means, but we have lived with the problem. We understand the problem. We know what goes into it, right? You see some of this World Bank reports out there that doesn't even reflect what is happening on the ground, right? Yeah. So let's get involved. Let's take niche research interests and problems. Give it to our professors. Get their supports. Resolve it. If possible, let's go to the grounds. Let's visit what is happening there. See things for ourselves. We'll be able to analyze it. Get primary data. Yeah, and then we are good to go. I think it's a matter of an all hands on deck issue. And then, yeah, we'll be able, if we are not even able to resolve, or we'll give a roadmap. We do our best. The rest will come and continue. Yeah, so that is it.
Thank you so much. This was amazing. Thank you so much. Let's move to the next question. Or does anyone wants to add anything on the food security part? All right, we can move to the next one. And it's just gonna be the same question, but on the water bodies, flooding, precipitation side, do you have any advice on how to address these complex challenges, and how can we as African students, African engineers, African lawyers, Africans working in the diaspora help and contribute to those solutions?
I would say to address these challenges, we need to prioritize particular infrastructure for governments to invest in. So yes, stadiums and new buildings are nice, but climate change is an urgent issue, and what we need to focus on is sustainable, resilient efforts to improve the overall quality of life for Africans. And right now, I'm just going to list some of examples of resilient efforts that are being developed across the continent. But first, one idea I would say would be to make roads resilient to flooding, because this is a problem that is only getting worse. So we can't stop the flooding, but we can control how we handle the flooding and how we handle how the water ends up pulled up on the streets. And I think that this can be managed by investing in drainage infrastructure. So we can take inspo from more developed countries and see how they've been able to develop sewer systems so that we can get water out of the streets, so that water doesn't disrupt our everyday life. And then another solution for climate change would be around desalination efforts. So desalination is the process of removing salt and other minerals from salt water so that this water can be suitable for agriculture. It could be used for drinking and for livestock, so that when there are droughts and there's not enough water, we have fresh water to use for crops so that they're not dying. And then another solution would be implementing seawalls around coastal cities. So seawalls can be built to help combat rising sea levels and flooding. So although this is not permanent, it slows down the process of rising sea levels, and it gives coastal countries more time to adapt to finding suitable solutions for climate change. So this also helps reduce flooding, which we know is a growing problem along coastal cities. And then I would say for students, I think we can raise awareness by getting involved in the African diaspora community, like joining your local African student union at school and just getting involved with like-minded individuals and joining clubs. Like I know tomorrow we're going to the UN to attend a youth event with OSA, so I'm pretty excited for that. And then I would say another solution would be raising funds, organizing events, fundraisers, having galas to raise money to surround projects that are focused on improving living conditions in Africa. And then lastly, I would say for students to do your research and to stay informed. I know being students, we have a lot of access to our school's database and portals and access to all these case studies. So maybe you could do your own research about what's going on in your country and just stay informed on how they are combating climate change.
Thank you so much for all of those resources. Thank you. I think we can move to the next one. And it's gonna be the same question, but on the socio-economic aspect of the thing. I think Phoebe is already ready to take the ground, so the mic is yours.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Justice and Gabriel, for going through like the conventional solutions. I think they're very, very, very important. I would take it from like a different perspective. I will try to just give like some unconventional solutions. So pardon me if I do that. I'm going to summarize my solutions into three principles that we've all heard our mothers or even our grandmothers, speak about. So my first principle is this: hold hands, stick together, and play fair. What do I mean by that? So we always hear, rhetorics like global solidarity, global justice. But in spite of all these rhetoric, you can see that there is no decision making on the global level. We are not holding hands, we are not sticking together. And because of the nature of the climate change issue, you need everyone on board. For instance, if Ghana decides to reduce its emissions drastically to net zero, and China, on the other hand, decides, oh no, we're not going to do anything about our emissions, and US also decides same, oh, we're not going to do anything about our emissions, we're not going to get to the target of a net zero emission, it's going to be impossible. Because of the nature of climate change, we all must stick together. We must have a united, collaborative solution. And I think the Paris Agreement is good. It's something in the right direction. But if we must stick together, then we must deal with the root causes of poverty, especially in developing countries. Because, like I said earlier, because of lack of resources, developing countries or countries from the global south are the most impacted by this climate change. So if we want to stick together, we must all address the root causes of poverty in developing countries. Now, if we're sticking together, what should we do globally? One, together we must change the international financial architecture, right? I'm talking about the Bretton Woods institutions, so the World Bank, the IMF, the what's the other one? IFC. I'm talking about these institutions. We must change the international financial architecture, right? When this international financial architecture was established, global South countries, specifically developing countries, were not at the table, right? And because of that, you find that we have a financial architecture that is skewed towards developed countries. That is the dominant countries of the global north. Can you? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah.
I think the meeting has been muted. I can't hear anything.
No, we can hear you. Can you hear me? You cannot hear me? Oh, okay.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me speaking?
Can anyone hear me?
Okay, I think I can hear you now.
Okay.
Okay. I think the line went off a bit. Is it okay now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Oh, I don't even know when I lost. Okay, so my first solution I indicated was for us to stick together. We should hold hands and we should try as much as possible to stay fair. How do we translate that? We have to change the international financial architecture. And like I indicated, I don't know whether it was, you guys heard me, but like I indicated, when the international financial architecture was established, which is the Bretton Woods institutions, we are talking about the World Bank, we're talking about IMF, we are talking about IFC. When it was established, global South countries were not there. So you find that we have an international financial architecture that is skewed towards the global North countries. So let me give an example of one aspect of the financial architecture that ought to be changed. One of them is the international tax framework, right? So I'll give a little bit of history. Let me digress a bit and try to give, in the 1940s, you'd realize that the Latin Americans, they advocated for a change in the international tax architecture. But what happened? The global North countries pushed against it, so it didn't happen. All they were asking for was for decision-making to move from global South countries to the UN, because you cannot be involved in a situation where you are the one making, I don't want to go into technicalities, but you can't be making decisions on how you should be taxed. Now let's take the decision making and give it to the UN. the global South North countries pushed against it. This was in the 1940s. Then it came back again in 2015, I believe. Same thing. This time, I think it was the African group, which tabled this, that look, we have to change the international tax architecture because it wasn't serving developing countries. Let's change decision-making from the OECD countries to the UN. Same thing, it was pushed back. So now we have an international tax architecture that is so disadvantageous to developing countries, right? I know you're probably wondering, how would changing an international tax architecture influence climate change? You remember that I said the main reason why we're experiencing the most impact is lack of resources. So there's a study by the UN, right, that if the global tax architecture is changed a little bit, what will happen is that it would give, if it's made a bit inclusive, what that would happen is that it will strengthen developing countries' fiscal policies. It would help with green transition in developing countries, and it would help developing countries deal with their climate change. This is a research by the UN, just changing the international financial architecture. Another example that we ought to stick together, right, is reforming the sovereign debt workout mechanism. Let me give you some figures. So as of 2023, I think the last time I checked, 20 countries out of 54 African countries find themselves either in debt, in or at high risk of debt distress. Why? Because the financial markets routinely impose like interest on developing countries that is like 8 times more than the interest they impose on developed countries. So what happens? Money that developing countries are supposed to invest in education, they're supposed to invest in healthcare, they're supposed to invest in agriculture, is being used to pay interest on debts. Interest that are 8 times more than the ones imposed on developed countries. Can you imagine the injustice of the international financial architecture? So if we're able to stick together globally and play fair, change an institution that was established at a time when global South countries were not at the table, or the framework is skewed towards global North countries. Global South countries are feeling the impact of climate change. We need resources to be able to tackle this. Change the financial institution. What that happens is it channels resources to these developing countries. Then they can well adapt. Then they can invest in education. They can invest in agriculture. They can invest in the healthcare system. This will make them resilient to the climate impact. Now, my second principle, I'll try and be short, is say sorry. I think we've heard our mothers say this all the time. Say sorry when you hurt someone and clean up your mess. Clean up your mess. Like we indicated earlier, the IPCC report is clear. The high polluters are not impacted. It's the least polluters that are impacted. The report gives an estimate of all those countries that are high polluters. We have China, we have US, you have European Union, like we know them. We know who the culprits are. So if you know this is what you've done, this is what you've caused, take accountability for it and clean up your mess. But we have an international framework, which is a Paris Agreement, which is good in a sense, but we have a framework that prohibits developing countries for holding developed countries accountable for climate impacts. Can you imagine? The science is clear. The science is obviously saying that, look, you guys are the culprits. And because of your activities, because of your behavior, some people in the global South are experiencing flood, are experiencing illness, are experiencing all the things that we spoke about, are experiencing poverty, even loss of life because of your behavior. Yet you put in place an international framework that says you cannot hold us liable for what we have done. So what I think we should be doing as a continent is that we must unite as a continent, because look, we cannot take on the global north or the high polluters as independent countries. We cannot. Ghana cannot on its own face the US or face China or face the European Union. We must, as a continent, unite to be able to hold these high polluters accountable for their actions. In fact, we've seen measures by small island countries. Small island countries have come together and they're using the international justice system. Yes, as skewed as the system is, they're trying to find a nuance. They're trying to find a loophole to hold these high polluters accountable. We see there's a case before the ICJ brought by small island states. There's a case also before ITLOS, which is the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. There's a case before them against the high polluters. Africa must wake up. We must wake up. We must unite, use the international justice system to hold these polluters accountable. What would that do? What would that translate into? There would be liability placed on them, right? Even the admission or the acceptance of liability will go a long way in terms of dealing with the impacts of climate change. And then my last advice, which I know you've all heard, is flash. How many times have your mom not gone to the bathroom and said, hey, come back and flash, like flash, right? What we must do as a continent is to flash down the system that consistently puts individuals' interest, right, above the survival of people and planet. What do I mean by that? We must flash corrupt political officials, right? According to the United Nations, Africa loses $50 billion every year to corruption. $50 billion. Now, let me put these figures in perspective, right? The climate finance commitments made by developed countries to developing countries is basically $100 billion annually. A recent report actually says that, look, even with that 100 billion commitment, all that has been received in terms of climate finance to Africa yearly is about $35 billion. Can you imagine if we're able to deal or flash down public corrupt officials? Africa is going to save $50 billion. $50 billion. And we're here accepting charity from developed countries, $35 billion a year. If we just put in mechanisms to flash down corrupt political officials, we're going to save $50 billion. And this in turn is going to help us deal with our climate issues, because all we need is the resources. Yes, even all the projects that Justice and Gabrielle spoke about, you need resources to be able to do these things, to do the solar, to do all these solutions that is being propounded out there. You need resources to be able to do that. So if we adequately as a continent work together and we are able to, one, change the international financial architecture, the tax system, the sovereign debt mechanism system, we're able to flash out, what do you call them, corrupt public officials, we would have excess resources to be able to deal with this issue. How a continent so rich in natural resources, so rich, can be so poor as not to be able to deal with the impacts of climate change is a shame. And I believe that as African students, whether in the diaspora or at home, it is incumbent on us to pick up the mantle. Yes, I mean, sometimes we have to be gracious. Sometimes we don't have to judge our leaders so harshly. Yes, we have to hold them to account, but we also have to realize that our first president of Ghana has a very profound statement I like. He says, if you judge us by the heights that we've attained, make sure that you recognize the depth from which we've come from. right? I think on the continent, one of the first countries to attain independence is Ghana, and we're basically just 67 years. So we can give ourselves some grace. All is not lost. About 67 years ago, in the lifetime of my mother, there was colonial rule, there was exploitation of our resources. But we are here now. Yes, we can recognize all the injustice that has been meted onto us, the skewed financial institutions, the skewed international frameworks. It's all there. But it's incumbent on us to move past it and look within ourselves. How can we, moving forward, take Africa to the next step? We cannot do that as individual countries. We cannot. The very essence of the division, the scrambling for Africa, was to make us powerless. That's why a small country in Ghana would not have so much power on the United Nations, at the World Bank, would not. But if we come together as a continent, the force alone will be enough to make substantive changes in the framework. So as students, the first thing I'll tell you is, let's be curious. Let's be curious enough. Let's read more. Let's try and find out more what is happening. Let's educate ourselves. These days, information is just at our fingertips. That's even the most amazing thing. Information is just right a click away. Be interested in the issues that is facing the continent. Once you're interested, sitting on classes, you don't have to do it for credit. Sitting on classes that talks about climate, sitting on classes that talks about climate finance, sitting on classes talking about, things that are impacting the continent, and gain enough knowledge. Once you gain the knowledge, let's mobilize as a continent, as students. And I like this platform. And I was very excited to do this because I feel like it brings students, all African students, together. So if we can mobilize as African students and do things that are already being done by other students, by other youth. We saw recently that 6 young Portuguese students brought a case against 33 European countries. 33 European countries on the issue of climate change. And these are Portuguese students. I don't even think they're facing half the impact of climate change as we are facing on the continent. If we're able to mobilize and do similar things, bring actions, take advantage of international justice institutions and bring actions. Before we can do that, we have to be informed. So let's try as much as possible to get ourselves informed, and let's mobilize and make use of the institutions. They are there for us to use. These Portuguese students, they do not have any special dispensation than us. We also have the right to be able to bring actions like that. We're not too young to get involved, right? So we have to take the baton, we have to take the mantle and make sure in a little small way, you sitting in on a class that talks about climate can go a long way to help you in terms of decision making once you find yourself in public places or in public office one day. So let's be curious, let's mobilize. And I'm sure that if we are able to do this as young Africans, we'll be able to deal with this issue of climate change.
All right. Thank you so much for all of the insights, and thank you so much for all of the advices. We are a little bit over time, but if anyone has any question in the audience, feel free to just send it in the chat. And yeah.
Hey, I'll probably ask a question real quick. And appreciate all the panelists for sharing. I think it's very, very insightful information that's been shared today, and also Phoebe, that powerful closing statement on what as African students we can do. I think is very, very vital to where we're going as a continent and as the African people. So maybe a question first. I think maybe we'll go to Justice on, you talked about carbon credits. That's kind of more on incentivizing. What goes, I think the other way you can kind of reverse some of these issues are on maybe punishments. Could you talk about maybe what are some ways that people are kind of thinking about in terms of that?
Yeah. Can you come a bit clear? I didn't really get your question well. What
Oh,
exactly?
yeah, so I think carbon credits has been one of the things that have been suggested in terms of, well, I guess not suggested, but it's something that's actually being implemented that could incentivize kind of rolling back some of those climate change polluters or maybe some projects. And I think maybe one of the things that that could also try to stop some of that maybe to punish. All right. So to be able to make let's say a coal polluting company that's producing power through coal plants, instead of I guess they won't get carbon credits, but maybe you can punish them. So what are maybe some of the ways that governments or organizations have thought of trying to kind of stop some of this effect by punishing in some ways? And what are the challenges around that?
Yeah, so to get your point clear, what you're trying to say is that, let's say, the government has already issued structures to punish, but then what are ways of making it effective? Is that what you're trying to ask?
Yeah, to some extent, yeah.
Okay, sure. So you see, one thing that is happening, one of the major issues and factors we have on the continent is law enforcement. You see, you ask yourself why my friend in the Netherlands will be like, you don't see bottles, people throwing plastic bottles on the floor. But then when he went for the the African Cup of Nations, people are just throwing bottles on the floor, right? You come to the US, you cannot just get to a gutter and urinate. There's actually a law for that. And it's not as if there's not a law for that in Africa. Let's say in Ivory Coast or in Ghana. There are laws over there, right? Or let's say you can just cross the red light and then for here, surely you'll be in trouble. By the time you get home, your bills are there waiting for you. But it's not right over there as well. There are law curtailing all those stuff. The issue boils down to the law enforcement. Who follows up on the wrong that each and everyone is doing? So in as much as there is punishment for carbon credits, who for flouting some of these issues, who is enforcing it? And who is making sure A gets punished for what he or she violates? So first of all, the law enforcement bit should be a bit more tighter, right? Let's say you come to you come over here, you park your car. The next day you come, your car has been towed. You have to go pay money for about $200 for it. You wouldn't do that again, right? So there should be more into the law is enforcement. Yeah, the law enforcement agencies should be able to do their job. So you are caught, you are made to pay for it, you keep paying, gradually your company will be running aground. You wouldn't want to lose that. So we should be more harder on the law enforcement. And the next one is behavioral. I think someone from, let's say, Ivory Coast or from Ghana will get to Ghana and then we'll just see a gutter and then just urinate. But the same person, when he comes to the US, you wouldn't do that, right? What changes? He's the same person, but then the environment has molded the behavior of the person. It's the same person, nothing has changed. The mind and the same body, everything, right? But the environment has changed the behavior of the person. So behavioral, yeah, and the environment we should create an environment where it will streamline your behavior. Yeah, and then we should also know better. Sometimes we take things for granted because, the system is a bit relaxed there. You can just call an uncle to come and bill you. You can just call a politician and then you're out. But yeah, it's in as much as the government is putting in systems, behavioral is also a part of it that, people will have to have, we will have to change for the better. Anyway, yeah, I don't know if you're satisfied with this.
Yeah, I think it touches a bit of the question. Maybe you to expand on that on maybe on an international scale. Is there something that uh, governments are using to punish companies that are polluting uh, versus anything else that might be out there?
You see, back to what I was saying, we understand the international bits are there, they are working. That is why I keep saying from the beginning that the African problem has to be solved the African way. The same way we have laws in the United States that do not cross a red line. The African comes to the US will not cross a red line because you come home, you have bills, you keep paying, the next moment your license is seized, you can't drive, right? Let's leave the same solution to Africa. It will not work. Why? It's the same body, the same mindset, and the same person. So in as much as we have some of these strategies on carbon credit working in other parts of the world, the Africans need an African solution. That is what I'm hammering on, that first of all, there should be a behavioral change. We are running to pay taxes, right? But there are a lot of companies even in Africa that doesn't know anything about tax paying. We keep compounding the taxes. Why? Nobody comes after us. Yeah, so first of all, behavioral, we have to change the mindsets and then do what is right. And then secondly, to the system, the law enforcement system has to work. If we're able to get this right in Africa, this carbon credit issues will be resolved.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question? Okay. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you for taking the time off your schedule to learn more about such a crucial topic. Throughout the discussion, we have delved into the critical issue of climate change and its profound impact on Africa. We've heard from our esteemed speakers about the challenges posed by extreme weather events, shifting rainfall patterns, and food insecurity on the continent. Our speakers have emphasized the urgent need for collaborative efforts and proactive measures to address climate change. They've highlighted the importance of immediate action to mitigate its impact and build resilience in African communities. It's been inspiring to hear about the importance of empowering young African students abroad with the resources and connection they need to become agents of change. By investing in their education and providing opportunities for leadership, we can drive sustainable development in Africa. Looking ahead, we've discussed potential solutions to address climate change, from investing in renewable energies to promoting climate-resilient agricultural practices. There are many avenues for action. I want to express my sincere gratitude to all of the speakers, panelists, and participants for their invaluable contributions today. Your expertise and passion have enriched our discussion and inspired meaningful dialogue. As we conclude, I urge all participants to remain engaged and proactive in addressing climate change issues affecting Africa. Together, we can work towards building a more sustainable and resilient future for the continent and its people. Thank you so much for giving us your time, and we hope to see you at our next NAfSA talk in May, hopefully.
Thank you, Diaji. Thank you, speakers.
All right. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Thank you so much. This was highly insightful. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Bye.